So now I'd like to call up the panel members as we move directly into the panel. Please come up. You're going to be able to hear now about some very exciting activities. Ted Gonder is the co-founder of Moneythink, expanding the opportunities of urban youth through peer mentorship. It's a nonprofit. Ayesha Khanna is the president of Points of Life, the Incubator accelerator in Atlanta, where she's been leading the incubation of Civic Ventures. And Cedric Hodgeman of UBELONG, co-founder. He's volunteering in Asia, Latin America, and Africa. They're up here. We're ready to go. Thank you. So, first question is, I mentioned partnering, and particularly an idea of ecosystem and becoming partner of choice. Does that work for you?
Yes, it works. It works for us.
Please.
It has to work for us. Fundamentally, inherently, our business model and our impact model are rooted in partnerships. We partner with high schools to deliver curriculum and volunteers. We partner with universities to recruit an army of college students to serve. And we partner with companies to resource the movement that we're building. And so it's absolutely necessary that we respect and honor the fact that we're part of an integral, that we're part of an ecosystem.
To get the job done, you've got to have all those partners. But what about when you came up with the idea? Was this something that was singular? I'm going to shift around all that we can all, wait, just all by yourself? Oh, here, we can share. All by yourself, or was the idea itself the result of sharing in a partnership?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'll start off though, just to go back on your initial question. This is probably one of the few days where I'm doing something that my friends think I would actually be doing every day as an entrepreneur. Most days on Wednesday morning, I'm in my box in front of my computer and being a technician. So to get back to your question though, yeah, ideas don't just happen. There's people, there's ecosystems around them, and especially as an entrepreneur, I think there's that initial idea and that burst of energy that kind of makes you take that first step. But once you get into it though, you kind of lose sight of it though, and you become more of a technician. And for me, it's sitting in my boxers and going at it on my computer though. So
well, before you totally dispel the idea that there's something glorious in all of this, but why are you doing that? I mean, is that part of being connected, or is that isolated? I'm trying to get a distinction there.
In terms of the energies are all about the ecosystems around you, the people around you, and I think especially as you go through the entrepreneurial process, so you've got to be able to kind of forget once in a while that, hey, I got to get off my couch and get out there and talk and get into a Civic accelerator and talk to people like this and be surrounded, and that's where the magic happens.
Okay, Ayesha, you live in a world of connectedness and the like. So how does it play out for you?
We absolutely agree, and actually think it goes a lot further than partnerships. We believe if you're trying to solve a social problem and you're not engaging people as part of the solution, you're going to fail or you're not going to be sustainable. So it's not just using those billion IQ points in partnerships, but it's actually applying those points across every dimension of your business model. And think about the power of that. So if you are leveraging people in everything that you're doing, and it's actually, if it's core to your model, we think that's much more powerful than just even thinking about it in a silo in terms of partnerships. So build the ecosystem and build a model that actually has customers as part of the solution, is thinking about people power, as UBELONG and Moneythink and the other ventures in our accelerator are. And we call it a civic venture, but it's people power. It's what's going to shape and fundamentally get to the source of these issues, these complex issues that we're trying to solve in society. You've got to engage people broadly at a kind of tipping point.
It's good points all the way around. So when an innovation, your innovation, the one you're working on now, is successful, we'll all know it because you'll be able to say, look, it's done what we set out to do, and maybe more. But prior to that, a big question is, how do you measure your progress and success? Because it takes a while to get to there from here. So what are the measures that you use and that you think about, both formally and informally? And I'm not talking about a long list. I'm talking about the ones that are most important, that come to the top of the mind when I say, how are you doing? They'll activate it.
So I think that
Give him the other one. We'll go to Plan B very quickly.
Plan B.
There you go.
So I think it comes back to rapid prototyping and being aware of rapid feedback loops, quick iteration cycles, and rather than measuring yourself against this distant outcome for some product that you're in love with, going back to kind of the hubris question, it's about measuring yourself against rates. So the rates of whatever those core metrics are that are integral to your success.
Give me an example.
So for us, one rate could be classrooms that we've expanded to over a 3-month period, right? Something very short period, something that's measurable, something that has a direct influence on our capacity to drive impact. And achieve the kind of longer impact measurement, rigorous outcomes that we're striving for, but something that we can also hold ourselves accountable to in the short term.
You said
with regard
goals
to
too?
Execution, yeah.
So, I mean, if it's important, you might say, so I need to have X number of classrooms by this
goals
point.
and milestones. So we run a nonprofit, it's 501c3,
Right.
and it started as a student movement. So you'd think, oh, these guys have no rigor or discipline, but
You said it, I didn't.
But I think that it's important to treat what might typically be thought of as a charity, treat it as a business, and measure it with the same kind of numbers and results that anyone in the private sector would.
But my facetious comment aside, there's absolutely no reason you wouldn't do that if you want to be successful.
Oh, absolutely. It's a universal kind of principle.
Aisha, what about you? We'll come back, but what about you in terms of, you're running an incubator, so you can look in, so I have two-part question. What do you look for the organizations in the incubator to be measuring, and then how do you think about whether the incubator is successful?
Yeah, and you know, we think one of the key measures of success is going back to this theme of how are you leveraging people, and how are you acquiring people, and every week. And how are they contributing to your creating value?
So there's the measurement of the ecosystem.
There's a measurement of the ecosystem, which we build in from the start, and then I think you know, the great success of an accelerator is selecting the right teams. That's half the battle. And so we're looking for teams that have got some traction, have tested, and are able to say, you know, that we know what these customers want, not just because we think we know what they want, it's a great idea, but we've actually been able to show that
as
in
in
a
a
very
prototype
tangible
or
way,
test?
as in the prototype and test. The other thing it's just really interesting, we have both for-profit and nonprofit ventures as part of our Civic Accelerator, and particularly for those ventures involved in social ventures, the cost of acquisition and the time of acquisition to paying customers is something that's typically overlooked, and many times they're not even thinking about that. So, you know, who are your paying customers as a nonprofit, and what does it take to acquire those customers in terms of time and cost, and how are you then going to grow to scale? So that's one of the key metrics that's overestimated, we've seen with a lot of the ventures that we've been speaking with and that are part of our accelerator, and being very clear, and frankly just getting clear on who are the core customers is a challenge when you think about some of the models and the ecosystems and what we're trying to accomplish. You're trying to change human behavior. You know, you're trying to engage individuals in classrooms. You're trying to get volunteers to go abroad and immerse in communities around the world. How do you know that those individuals have transformed as part of that experience? How are you creating value, and how are you acquiring more customers, and what does it take? So it you know, it can be complex, but laser focused on that is what we found is really helpful.
Cedric, any comments about that?
Yeah, no, I think one of the really interesting things that you started to bring up, though, about the Civic Accelerator is that we have both nonprofits and for-profits together. We all have a social mission, but there's different structures, and it's been really interesting as we go through it, though. You know, we all have that double bottom line, right? We have the social bottom line, and then we have the economic bottom line, and it's just been interesting to see how the nonprofits maybe are a little bit more geared towards the social line, and then maybe the for-profits are thinking more about revenues and top lines, and just seeing how that comes together. Because at the end of the day, you need both of them. But kind of seeing how people are coming from different places and kind of coming to a meeting point.
I find it actually a little bit amazing that people don't think about all the different aspects. So there's 4 parts to a business model. you can make it more complicated. But there's 4, which is the value you deliver, how you deliver it, how you monetize it, or how you make sure the value is captured if it's a nonprofit, and then who, in fact, is receiving it, customers, if you will. How good have you been at working all 4 of those? Isn't that something that maybe evolves over time, or did in fact, when you start, you had a clear vision on all 4 of those elements? Yeah, I know I didn't tell you I was going to ask that, but so you can try next, Cedric, if you want to.
Yeah, you want to start? I need some thinking.
You can tell it's a hot
I
topic
think,
because they're passing the microphone around.
I mean, I think for us it's much simpler. I mean, for us it's with an economic bottom line, and we've got to make money so that we can continue on. So that's going to be revenue generation, and for UBELONG, it's going to be getting people to join us, and we'll put them overseas. Then there's that social bottom line, though. So are we actually making an impact? When we're putting a microfinance volunteer to Cambodia, is he making a difference? Is something good happening?
That's the value capture. Is it bringing about the
right?
change?
So for us, it's really just those 2 things, and constantly looking at that, and you know, and getting back to your point before about, you know, impact evaluation and so forth. It's an ongoing process. It's something which happens, you know, systematically, and that we're aware of it, and that we need to be doing it. But it's constant. It's informal. It's communications with our volunteers. Are you having a good experience? Are you enjoying yourself? Conversations with the local communities. Are these volunteers doing something? Are they making a difference, and so forth? So it's just a constant dialogue that we're having over time. But for us, it's much simpler. It's just those 2 things, and that's just all we're thinking about.
Great.
You know, when you look at accelerators in tech and mobile, their measures of success have primarily been what's the exit and what's the, you know, and we think about that a little bit differently. You know, we're being a civic accelerator, so we're thinking about what's your impact that you're having on the end users, what's the sustainable recovering revenue that you're creating, because that's the only way to grow to scale, and that differs across nonprofits and for-profits. And then, you know, to your point, are you around catalytic innovation? Are you creating such a new model that is really getting to the heart of this issue, that you are really addressing the issue that you say you're addressing? And that's a harder thing to measure, and it's not going to happen while you're in a 12-week accelerator or even the year after. But how are you fundamentally shifting the dynamic and getting to the core of these issues? And so we are trying to build, from an accelerator, we're holding ourselves accountable to all of those metrics, just as the ventures are holding themselves accountable. And then to your partnership question, who's being engaged? Who are the investors? Who are the partners? How are you engaging broadly across an ecosystem to help address these issues? That's also a core metric for us as the accelerator.
Great. So Cedric talked about how the for-profits in the accelerator come at it from more of a market angle, and the nonprofits come at it from more of a social angle. Really surprising, right? But what I've found is that that's absolutely true. With us as a nonprofit, when we first started out, it was, I mean, the only thing we cared about was capturing social value. We said, there's a major problem. All these high school students are entering the real world unprepared to face the financial challenges post-recession. And we're on this University of Chicago College campus with all these brilliant econ students. Let's put 2 and 2 together and try to solve the problem. And then we put impact metrics in place and surveys and all sorts of kind of longitudinal things to start capturing the social value and prove that over time. But what this accelerator has really showed us is that we also need to be thinking about solving a market problem. So the schools that we're working in, how are we solving problems for the principals that are giving us permission to access their students on a weekly basis? Or not. Yeah, and how can we fix that, and how can we realign our business model without creeping away from our mission to achieve those end goals in a way that's totally aligned with our partners?
So the thing that we say in Silicon Valley, which is your business model is only half right or it's half wrong, it's turned out to sort of be true in the sense that you got part of it spot on right, but another part maybe not so much.
Yeah, well, it wasn't that we didn't have that it was wrong. It was more just that we were unaware, and we've been able to gain a lot more clarity on it and develop a strategy and a plan based on that new knowledge that came from customer interaction.
Great.
Something that is also interesting is seen as, you know, nonprofits sometimes are able to raise seed money faster. You have a really compelling vision. You're able to track folks and say, I believe in that. But what might sometimes happens is they prematurely scale. So you've got funding up front, but you haven't created recurring revenue streams. You really don't understand a business model. You haven't thought about who your customers are, and you haven't tested and prototyped. And so again, it's fascinating to see the shared learning in this cohort of 10 that are going through the accelerator, but also the different levers of success and change. And for some of our nonprofits that are coming in that have had great early success, we don't want them falling off a cliff, in a year or 2 years, because they haven't really figured out what's the fundamental business model and I've got customers that are engaged because I know them so well. So it's a little bit different than the for-profit side, which may have a business model that needs to be tested and pivoted, and you need to iterate, but also thinking about, well, what's the social impact that you're trying to accomplish, and who are you engaging to do that?
Right.
If you're delivering curriculum, do you need to deliver that curriculum, or can you scale it by leveraging human capital in a way that's delivering your curriculum across the country? And so your expertise has to change, and you have to think about, am I developing a service or product, and how does that play out? So,
but you've raised a very interesting point, and I want to build on that, which is the scaling question. So getting started, getting funded, wrestling with what it is that you deliver, what you know and what you don't know. We've just sort of walked through that particular discussion, and there's more to unpack there. But ultimately, there's a scaling. There's a question of, you want to go something larger than you are, to be determined. When do you start thinking about that? And I think I heard Ayesha say you need to think about it earlier rather than later, so that you don't get locked into something or alternately die prematurely because you weren't looking at how to grow. I've just put words in her mouth, but I think that's what she said. She can rebut me in a second. When do you think about scaling, or is that something you're going to get to next?
So we did prematurely scale because we had such robust partnerships. So we started at the University of Chicago with a club there that was funded by the university, and then our friends at USC wanted to start the same thing in South Central LA, and our friends at Columbia wanted to start the same thing in Harlem, and their universities were willing to fund it too, and so we didn't even need an institutional entity to support all of it. But once it had spread to over 24 campuses across the country, and the president recognized it at the White House in March, we were like, well, maybe we should go full time. And maybe all of these chapters need support and oversight and resources, and maybe there's a business plan that needs to be put in place to scale this sustainably, right? Because at a certain point, you are going to reach that cliff. And so... Or
you'll just crater from everyone needing different things and going on, sort of making up their own solutions, at which point you might end up losing the value.
Exactly. There's sort of an organizational carrying capacity. And so we kind of came back together and pressed the restart button, and we're building now a citywide model that's entirely based on the right partnerships. So partnerships with Teach for America to get into new classrooms and get training in place. Partnerships with other folks, companies, to make sure that there's local support in place as we roll out future cities. But the model has changed because we've rethought the notion of scale.
That's intriguing. Now, your scale is large because it's global, or at least reaches around the globe, but scaling here probably means something different. So I know it's not how far you're reaching geographically that you might be thinking about, but it could include some other aspects in terms of what you're offering and what you're doing. What about, when do you think about scaling?
Immediately. I mean, scale for us is everything. A lot of it just has to do with the nature of our business. It's based on economies of scale. For our program to work, we need to have a lot of people in a particular location doing a lot of work. So,
well, that's a generality, but why is it true specifically for yours? Don't just explain that
sure.
little piece.
Right. So, what we're doing is putting individuals into countries abroad to do volunteer work, and for them to, one, have an impact on the communities. There can't just be one every 3 months coming through. There's got to be a continuous stream of them. So that's the obvious one. And then second, just in terms of the experience themselves, people have more fun if I've got a bunch of friends that are going to be hanging out with me at night. So for us, immediately, we had to figure out a way to make this thing big fast. So it's fast, it's immediate, it's something that we were constantly thinking about.
So you had to get it to it early. You got to it because it led you there, and then had to rethink it. That's a very interesting contrast. Ayesha, when you look at your portfolio of companies, any other thoughts or insights about the scaling issue? One question I have is how big a problem is scaling from your standpoint overlooking Incubator? Because it sounds like the diversity I've got 2 data points here. I can draw a line through 2 data points. Is that there's a lot of differences, and this is a challenge. Is that true?
No, absolutely. And the accelerator is an experiment too. We're not going to scale till we figure out how to get it right. And the first test was, is there a need in the market for an accelerator focused on civic ventures, and do these tools and methodologies, the lean startup methodologies, apply to the civic space and to nonprofits and for-profits that are doing that. So we've ourselves been testing and pivoting the accelerator, and what does a sustainable model even look like for an accelerator? So we're going to try to get it right and make sure we meet our metrics. We're in the first cohort that just launched a month ago before we think about scaling the accelerator. But the reason we're really focused on this is because in order, again, to fundamentally address issues like poverty or access to quality education, you need to think broadly about what are those models that are able to leverage new technologies, engage people around the world, across the country, to move the needle on these issues. And you do want to think big, but you've got to get it right and make sure that you've got real, true traction. So that's what we looked for. That was one of our screening criteria. In addition to, great teams is critical, in addition to what traction, in addition to the great idea. But have you thought about, again, leveraging human capital and how you want to scale to really address the problem, not work around the edges, but get to the heart of some of these issues?
On that theme, now that you all are doing it, in your case, you're innovating the way
Month in, yeah.
Yeah, right. That's all right. That's a lifetime. In the world of new ventures, that's at least one lifetime, possibly more, as you all well know, and probably thrive and love every moment of it. But with that, and knowing what you know now, what do you wish you had known when you got started, when you first jumped in? Cedric?
Getting back to my first point, being a social entrepreneur is pretty lonely. There's not a lot of people doing it. And like I said, especially in the beginning though, it's you just by yourself over that computer, and you need to remember to reconnect. You need to do things like the Civic Accelerator and get back out there and kind of get away from the screen. So I think I wish I had known this was going to be a lonely experience, and you've got to get through that.
All right.
Commitment begets freedom, begets focus.
You got to explain that to me.
So we started this as students, right? And when you're a student, you're surrounded by other people, most of whom are pretty risk averse, and almost none of whom are, if they are starting something, they're dropping out to go start it. And everybody's applying for jobs, and there's a lot of pressure to kind of go with the mold. And I always sort of wondered what it would be like to dive in head first to pursue the vision with 100% effort, not involved in anything else, not
a part-time job.
No backup options, right? Burn all the boats to prevent a retreat, block all the exits.
A Cortez metaphor. Okay, I'm with you.
And
but you got to keep it short because they're going to yank us off the stage here.
Well, yeah. So but I think that commitment actually permitted the focus and the sense of freedom that a lot of folks seek elsewhere.
And I wish I had known how hard it is to raise early stage funding and how to bring funds into early stage and to join folks like Starbucks Foundation, the PwC Charitable Foundation. So the challenge of bringing traditional funders over to put their capital at risk to really try to drive innovation in this space, it's tough, and there are not many players in this space. There's more around the impact investing and where you're looking to scale. We're early stage and trying to support good, best, right ideas. So that was one thing I wish I'd learned. And I would say the nice thing to see that happened that we learned is the power of peer learning and peer evaluation. In our model, it's the entrepreneurs themselves that select who gets the two $50,000 investments. We invest seed funds in all of them, all 10. But so there's a power of, and the decisions made by peers that know each other better than any top-down kind of model about who's going to succeed and who's investable at the end of the program. It's unbelievable to see that at work. and to have that really holding each other accountable. So that's one of our hypotheses that we're testing, that peers can make better decisions than expert investors, and we've started to see that play out. Certainly, Village Capital, our partner, has seen that over the last 4 years. So that was a great learning.
I want to get a report later on how they whether you get data or discovery when you test that particular hypothesis, because it's an important one. Thank you. This has been eye-opening. It's been extremely informative. And it's a great way to kick off today's activity. So I want to thank the panel. Please. You can go.